Thank you for joining us for the afternoon session of the National Yangming Jiaotong University's Anthropocene and Cold War Mini Symposium. The afternoon session is titled Life and Material in the Cold War East Asia. My name is Juyoung Lee, PhD candidate at Johns Hopkins University's Department of History of Science and Technology, working on the network of private consultants behind fertilizer plants in Taiwan and South Korea. So in our morning session, Professor Park commented that results and causes of Anthropocene effects depends on different settings. So in this afternoon, we're kind of taking the notion of Anthropocene and taking it within the particular context of Cold War. Cold War has been discussed by scholars of STS because of its complicated political setting. Exposes the moments of entanglement between science, technology, medicine, and human. So today's speakers for the afternoon session will enhance this entanglement by discussing material culture behind human, examining the entanglement of human, animal, fish, plant, and other non-human materials within Cold War's political, social, and cultural setting. Each speaker will have about 20 minutes for their presentation, which will be followed by Q&As. Our first speaker is Professor Jaehwan Hyun, Assistant Professor of Science and Technology Studies at Busan National University's Institute of General Education, earning his PhD in History of Science and Technology from Seoul National University. He works on the Cold War history of human biology and environmental sciences. Our second speaker is 𝗟𝘀𝘁, Associate Professor of National Zhengzi University's Department of Sociology. He received his PhD from Duke University's Department of Sociology, and his research interest includes population and health, shipbuilding industry. Finally, we have Professor Chen Jianmin, Associate Professor of National Zhongxing University's Department of Chinese Literature. He holds PhD degree in anthropology from University of Hawaii and Manoa. His previous research focuses on tourism in East Asia. So this was my introduction to all the three speakers for the afternoon session, and without further ado, I will hand it over the stage to Dr. Hyun. Please welcome him with a big hand.
So, thank you. Thank you, Juyoung, for the nice introduction, and I also thank Wenha for this opportunity to introduce my work to the Taiwanese colleagues. And the current work, the translation origins of migratory animal pathological survey, is preliminary, so I'm really looking forward to listening to your feedback and comment after my talk. Okay. Because right now I have many things in my hands. Okay. So let me introduce my research subject. So I'm looking at the American military-initiated international project called Migratory Animal Pathological Survey, or MAPS. This project is well known as an international bird banding project. That is, to put rings on birds' legs to identify and keep track of individual birds. But this 8-year project was devised for several purposes. First, to determine the origins and movement of migratory bird populations in East Asia. Second, to make a study of avian ectoparasites to serve as background information for epidemiological studies in Asian laboratories of the zoonosis. Third, to make a survey of the hematozoa in birds. And finally, to accurate general information concerning the ecology of Asian birds. Military entomology was backgrounded on the project purposes, and it's not surprising given that it was initiated by the US Army entomologists And the support came from the US Army Research and Development Group Far East and Walter Reed Army Institute of Research. If we turn our attention to the scope of cooperation, it's a very trans-Asian. It included field workers and scientists based in South Korea, Japan, Taiwan, Hong Kong, the Philippines, Thailand, Malaysia, Borneo, Indonesia, Singapore, and India, which were located below the bamboo curtain. The most active participants were from South Korea, Japan, Taiwan, Thailand, and Malaysia, where the presence of the US military was prevalent. Practitioners were also military scientists working in the US-based laboratories. For instance, Masayoshi Yoshi, a Japanese collaborator, worked at the 406 Medical General Laboratory, Tokyo, in Japan. So if we define the nature of the project, it was a trans-Asian Cold War project of the US military. It sounds awkward, but today I would like to talk about the trans-Asian origins of this trans-Asian Cold War project by focusing on the interactions between Asian actors. So, who was the principal investigator of this project? It was Elliot McClure, born in Chicago and an entomologist turned birdman. He was trained in entomology, but started his career as an ornithologist at the 406 Medical General Laboratory, Tokyo, from 1950 to 1958. Later, he moved to the US Army Medical Research Unit in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia, but soon came back to Tokyo as a PI for MAPS in 1963. So for the first 3 years, the MAPS headquarters were located in Tokyo. But in 1966, it was newly settled at the US component, Seattle Medical Research Laboratory, Thailand. So what were the MAPS activities? In the early years, after the settlement of participants, the headquarters trained them in bird banding and cellological and entomological techniques, and supplied materials like bird wings and immunochemical materials. For the training and sharing of the research, the headquarters annually held MAPS conferences or workshops. These events were often held together with the meeting of the International Council for Bird Preservation. After the completion of training, regional participants carried out fieldwork in their own countries. What the field workers did were bird banding and zoological and entomological surveys. The result was that they banded 1,165,288 birds of 1,216 species in total. So here is the process of the MAPS activities. While stationing in the field workers banded birds, filmed their blood, and extracted ectoparasites. After that, they reported the place and species information of the banded birds to the headquarters and sent blood and ectoparasite specimens to cooperative US military laboratories. For instance, Japanese bird banders sent their blood samples to the 406 Medical General Laboratory, Tokyo, while Malaysian participants did zoological analysis by themselves at the US Army Research Unit, Kuala Lumpur. Meanwhile, the public or lay people who found the banded birds sent a letter containing the information about the place of their encounter to the mailing address written in the bird wing, and it was the Hong Kong Reference Center. All the information was later sent to headquarters, and the headquarters made annual reports based on the collection. I believe that the project itself is explained in detail, and I wanted to focus on my main interest now. And it's a photograph of participants in the MAPS Joint Conference with the International Council for Bird Preservation. here, I'm interested in the figure of number 2 in this picture. He is the South Korean team leader, 𝗟𝘀𝗳𝗲 Won. So I will call him Dr. Won from now. So he was a young, unprivileged South Korean biologist who had graduated from the newly established second-tier Korean university, Kyunghee University, and just obtained a PhD from Hokkaido University in Japan in 1960. He had the chance to work as a postdoc at the Yale Peabody Museum under the guidance of Dylan Ripley in 1960 and 1961. Nevertheless, he recollected that the biggest turning point in his career and the history of Korean ornithology, as well as bird conservation in his country, was his participation in the MAPS project. I would like to attend to his essay, The History of Ornithology in South Korea, written in Korean. In the paper, his recollection of the MAPS project is a bit different from the explanation I offered previously. He says, from July 1963 to June 1969, within the support of the US government, I carried out research on the migratory routes of birds. Here the MAPS is described as a bird banding project. That's true, but he doesn't mention any pathological aspects. In fact, a core aim of the MAPS project, and even the changes the project name. In fact, once a group was unable to carry out any research related to pathological part of MAPS. At Kyunghee University, those studies were only enabled after 1970, 1 year before the project ended, and when the Department of Parasitology was established. Before that, he didn't develop any collaborative relationship with the US military entomologist Edwin Tyson, who had been dispatched to Korea by the Smithsonian Institution and closely worked with scientists at the 406 Jumbo Medical Lab Tokyo. That is related to his lab didn't have any material infrastructure to conduct any pathological research. So in fact, his group only carried out the bird banding part while dismissing the pathological part. If you read McCulloch's evaluation report of one's qualifications, you should be curious about why McCulloch chose Won as his Korean partner. He says, Won is a very aggressive person resulting from economic and academic starvation, jealous of other university professors who are more affluent. Kyunghee is a new university built on a lavish scale with a complete lack of reality. No maintenance, incomplete buildings, no furnishings, no heat, no laboratory equipment, even no office equipment. One has office on the 7th floor with no elevator, no heat, only a desk and chair. We will need everything: field, office, and supportive equipment. My impression is that he will work on this project. Most of the funds will go for salaries, and the result we get may not be great. So I wanted to ask here, despite his one's team's incapability of pathological research and McCulloch's very low opinion of one's qualifications, why was one included in MAPS? To understand his inclusion, we have to look at the Japanese group's role in the formation of MAPS and the early activities. Recently, Japanese historian Annika Culver beautifully shows that Japanese ornithologists like Nagaisa Kuroda and Yoshimaru Yamashina carried out inter-Asian surveys during the Japanese Empire and called the activities an attempt to build an avian empire. In the post-war years, those imperial ornithologists collaborated with the US military scientists in southern Japanese forests in the Japanese archipelago. I would like to locate the MAPS project within the context of Japanese ornithologists' revitalization of the Trans-Asian bird surveys in the early 1960s. Indeed, in 1960, a new opportunity came to Japanese ornithologists. It was when the Japanese yen became finally normalized in its exchange value, so could afford to do overseas activities, and when the Japanese government began to support and encourage overseas fieldwork activities. Furthermore, Yoshimaru Yamashina, a relative of the Japanese Emperor Hirohito, could exert some power to gain some governmental support in their international universities. Using the new money and power, Kuroda and Yamashina ambitioned to host international world conferences and make the Yamashina Institute a center for Asian ornithology and promote a Trans-Asian bird banding project. In this context, the Yamashina Institute hosted the International Council for Bird Preservation, or ICBP, meeting in Tokyo, and it was held in Asia for the first time. Yamashina ornithologists also established the Asian section within the ICBP. Yamashina became president, and Young Kuroda became vice president. National members of the Asian section were selected by relying on the Japanese ornithologists' colonial ties. 𝗟𝘀𝘁 was chosen as secretary of the Korean sector since he was the son of Hong-gu-won and younger brother Byung-hee-won, Japanese ornithologists' long-term colonial collaborators. After the establishment of the Asian section, the Yamashina Institute gained funding from the Japanese Forestry Agency to carry out a Trans-Asian bird banding project, but because of some political reasons, it soon ceased in 1963. It was the very time when Colonel Barnes of the Walter Reed Army Institute approached Kuroda at the Yamashina Institute to get some advice concerning the movement of wild birds suspected of transmitting Japanese encephalitis viruses. They persuaded the colonel to initiate the MAPS project for pathological research purposes and recommended McClure as a PI. And due to this background role in initiating MAPS, the Japanese could influence the early setting of the project. Now we can understand one's inclusion in MAPS. He came to be involved in the project by the help of Japanese ornithologists. Indeed, for one, MAPS was a bird banding project initiated by the Japanese ornithologists at the ICBP Asian section. So one's team considered Kuroda and his colleagues at the Yamashina Institute as the main audience of their work, and focused on the bird migration between Japanese archipelago and the Korean peninsula. The pathology part, the US PI's interest, was totally ignored in general, at least in the early years. It is also interesting that one's team used the supplies that came from the Yamashina Institute, not from MAPS headquarters, for the first few years. And it means that all the letters from the public who discovered the birds, the data would be gained by the Yamashina Institute, not by McClure, the US military scientist. Indeed, the Yamashina Institute was a place where one himself and his students were retrained in bird banding and ornithology. And I need to study further, but I speculate that McClure's movement of headquarters from Tokyo to Bangkok might be related to such powerful presence of the Japanese team in the early period of MAPS. I would like to get back to my definition, only definition of MAPS. I said that it was a Trans-Asian Cold War project of the US military. It's still true, but if we consider the early history of maps and the role of Japanese ornithologists at the Yamashina Institute, we should consider it as our Trans-Asian Polar project that had been built on the revitalization of Japanese avian empire's network and desire in the early 1960s. South Korean biologist Won could be part of the polar project, not because of the polar importance of South Korea for US military scientists, but because of his ties with Japanese former avian imperialists. I hope that my crude observation helped today's discussion on life and material in Korea, East Asia. That's all. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. That was a very interesting talk that not only talks about like US, East Asia, but also like trans-Asian connections and also about birds as well. I think we'll have more chance to discuss later in the Q&A section. And I'll introduce our next speaker, Li-Hsuan, professor from National Tokyo University. And today he will talk about his new research on fishery and aquaculture.
I just first give you a picture here. It's the typical landscape of the, if you find most, I can remember this most southwestern coastal village. And what do you find? And you know, where's the village? And that's not a farm, that's all fish farm. So it's like an ocean. If you look at it, that's the I just simply find some typical of the way. Like if you visit anyone, probably anyone, it's look like this nowadays. So it's a typical landscape, and in many townships you probably have half of this half village. It's look like this. So that because that's a very town has a. Now it's declining, but it had a huge agricultural sector, aquatic sector, especially here. So I want to talk about how it began and how it kind of evolved, actually gradually kind of deviate from the original path. So first is the agricultural development. I just have a showing introduction here. That's the in 1950 and probably 1950, 1960, probably until 1970, US and some Japanese development agencies actually provide resource, train local expert, and shape policy network. And what's there? This is often forgotten history because in Taiwan we often talk about the process of industrialization. But actually, before the industrialization, there is a certain period. Agricultural export is the main source of foreign reserve. I think probably before 1960, I have the number, but I don't remember the detail. Of course, most are sugar or rice, but also you can see this kind of structure that is those research institute or development agency. They try to promote more some more commercialized agriculture and more high value like this. And there's government, and they have several they have facilitated export and sponsors on R&D. Also heavily promoted the modern agriculture. And the interesting fact is that if we look at the two things above, we often have a sense that probably we'll go to some large corporation, but that's not because the land reform and the later continuous protection for the small farmer. Most of these agricultural projects actually finally done by those small farmers. So I want to tell the story today is aquatic development that is very interesting. We now see the most advanced or most advanced country in the aquatic industry is Norway, and which dominated by 3 or 4 big firms. if you look at the Southeast Asia, you look Thailand also have some very large firms. But in Taiwan, there's almost not such case. They're all we not say small, but actually I will talk about the structure because the structure actually persists until today. So it's very similar. There are some institutes like R&D and technology transfer, and government encourage export, especially to Japan. And throughout the 1950 to 60, Japan is the main destiny for the Taiwanese agricultural product. And local farmers create a structure, vertical specialization, localized technology. And I will explain a little bit more later. So I will talk about the beginning because the agriculture actually can trace back 200 or 300 years ago, like Qing Dynasty. We now have some historical evidence, or even much longer, like the Dutch period, you have some historical record. But the key point, I will give here. So for example, like here, I just first showed the shrimp production to explain what's changed here. Is that in the history, most do the final part, and the local language called the big shrimp is that you catch the fry from the ocean, and you try to fit it in your pond, and then you come down to you sell it or eat it. So that's the typical structure. Is that you only for here, but the problem is in this part. That's kind of not before 1968. Before 1968, we don't have this part. You cannot reproduce this part in your laboratory or any place. So you have to catch them from the ocean. So they don't. This part is you have much longer history. But for this part, this much later, not until the 1960s from the project. And this is from the first one who did this. It's called Li-Hsuan Cheng, and he graduated from National Taiwan University and then went to the Tokyo University, got his PhD. And this project is sponsored by the Rockefeller Foundation, and I will say that I think many people here probably know that there's a certain type they call protein anxiety. I use the term, because they try to increase the production of any kind of protein. So in Taiwan, they kind of sponsor the aquaculture, they sponsor the pig farm, they sponsor the distant fishery. Anything can increase the production of the protein. And in some way, it's very successful because in Taiwan, not until probably 2000, all these sectors are very large and very large, even around the world. Like a pig farm, Bhutan was the #2 exporter before 1997. And the distant fishery is nowadays still a big player. And also the agriculture, Taiwan has exported more. I'm the #1 in shrimp export in 1988, so that's the story. So Li-Hsuan, also the Rockefeller Foundation, they kind of sponsor, they build a team and they get money, but most of the training are done in Japan. I'm not the expert for for the STA, so I don't really trace back where they are trained. But I noticed that most all the technicians they are trained. First of all, they probably many of them grow up in the Japanese period, so many of them can speak or read Japanese. And the second is that those research institutes, they constantly send people to Japan to learn. But in 1968, Li-Hsuan, he was then the fishery, the director of the Tongan branch. It's very relatively small one. The name of this institute actually changed several times. I didn't show it, but that's the institute is still there, and that's the Fishery Research Institute, the branch there. He was the director, and he made breakthrough, and I should explain, is that he made this part possible. By many ways, you can do this. And which means now your fry were not constrained by the nature. In the past, you can only have so many shrimp. It depends on how many fry you can catch in the ocean. Still nowadays, eels is still the case, so many people try to catch them. But most of fishes we don't do that. We don't do that anymore. So when I did this research, because my father was brought up in a fishery very interesting, I asked him. He said yes, because when he was children, one of their kind of income is trying to catch this fry, not only ships but many other fish, and to sell them to the fish farm. So that's the typical part. So you now have kind of broke the constraints of these priorities to the nature. So that's what Dr. Liao did, and this is what I visit him. So the price of technology pension in Japan, and also because broke the constraint of these after 1997, the growth exponential. And so that's what you can translate. And this is what I visited 2 years ago. That's why the landscape is. So the price of technology pension in Japan, and also because the production every cost after 1997, maybe a little bit of the growth is exponential, but many, so it's a cost. You can trace back to this baby farm, and they just dig their farm to shift them. That's why the landscape fish farm. And now panel has shown you don't have more control. Every research time, every maybe a little bit under control, but have many changes the coastal village and the many farmer, they just dig their farm. So if you look at any official record, don't have more control. You are saying certain time, that's kind of how to control it is also that should change the whole. This breakthrough they have had a great. And so the so. If you look at any official record later, you say in the local social network or local structure, this is that first that's called John Traeger problem in the 1980s. But I want to talk about changes. What happened later? So in 1980, local social network and local structure in terms of is that first that's called John Traeger problem, and many people still. So I think the kind of. So government and but that many older people they remember things and many people still older generation. I think the kind of the glory government and that's not like course. Many even older people they remember more about this field work and many older generation they still remember the. But the problem is the empire. Now of course that's not. Anymore evidence. Problem. So how the production system shift? Because when I do the planning of field work, I ask those. The problems. The whole production system shift because when I do the field work, I ask those. Not because he's so bad. It's just in the fish farmers, and they are they don't really have that kind of relation. And not because he's bad. It's just in the that's fair. They are not an issue because I don't really have that kind of relation. And that's fair, that's a way issue because I say kind of. But when they make money, they didn't give it the right way. And here, they blame me. But not really money really make a profit. So how can they blame me? Not really make a profit. The key issue is here. The production system is dominated by small factories. The key issue is here. The production system is dominated by small factories. Most of these farmers, they are. Remember that most of them literate, but many of them don't have. Probably literate, but many of them don't have. They have elementary school education. Many of them have elementary school, very high education. Also, some of them have very high education. That's a small. So the way they did it is that they kind of when those systems build up, they kind of development knowledge on how to shrink or other fish. Miniature of formal knowledge and experience. So how do they do that? For example, I give you an example. What's many of the generation. So the important issue here is that not exactly what's the water and what's the fate of those the fry or the small fry. So for example, like a water, the way they understand the water by those farmers. If you are the formal trained scientist, major a lot of things. The soul, major acid. But they kind of assist to look at the colors of the water. That's how. And they even test that for your many younger generations. They did that. say that's kind of unhealthy or but older generation they can make those knowledge kind of passing down embody by their body, processed by their bodies. They also divide the five stages, that become the system of the trust. Every stage has many forms. So people constellation, the transaction stage, and they are very powerful. So I kind of follow the transaction, and they got back. So they got back. So that's 2000. Give up the array one, and how do you find the 2000? Ask me. Can you find that? They have some way to calculate it. There's the problem. 10,000, 16,000. That's very and so if you are many people specialize in kind of stream and they have eggs and so to these farmers they kind of make the egg become fry they have 2 weeks they sow to the certain people get it of the 2 weeks period the final and the black shells in the final one they told that big fish and you can find almost every type of fish was kind of producing this. And like grouper, higher value nowadays, not many people have the shrimp, but produce shrimp, but grouper does like grouper value. But the structure is the same. Small farmers, they have. So we look back to this landscape is not only show water, but you can know water. There are many small ponds. And probably which is owned by different. So they kind of different stage. Very limited stage. They can handle the knowledge like. They probably have some of the stage, what kind of stream, what the water is most important, or the given stage, they have different focus. So that's the way how the cohort, the kind of some big company, and it is a big race now, even though some kind of by the US agency and the transfer, which is also like the previous study shows that kind of people can trace back because of the period. Because now this kind of breakthrough actually made in that. So that's why their technicians they continue to identify village. And I even know the magazine one magazine translating the Japanese episode to the Taiwan. So that's the boom of that time. So that's how much they work. So they work passing knowledge. They kind of shift those productive cycles which originally is the paper is like description of the element of water or soil environment is best stage, but they later change this to a passing knowledge. So that's small farm. Until now, still never shift to even I heard some company try to invest, but they fail. But that's all another still kind of system was more farm. Even though some of them actually have the investment. So that's the systematic we have a very strong management. Okay, so that's the outcome of that. So of course they have some risk and because they don't have a good environmental management system, they have constant problem of fish disease. And the way they deal with that is that they probably put some drugs. So I think there's a big interesting SDS issue is that how they use drug and how this drug was tested. But I'm not expert in this respect. But that's always a big issue in the aquatic industry because that's, especially when you want to export or like recent trouble with China, they claim that the fish Taiwan export have some drugs, still have some illegal drugs in within the fish body. So mostly from virus and the bacteria. So how do they deal with that? They deal with that by introducing new species. And that's another story. I think that's kind of unintended outcome of the original system. But because Taiwan is a subtropical, so kind of easier to find some species. And but any new species, the local farmers, they try to bring down to this system. So like grouper actually is from South China Seas, like area, Southeast China, and many different fish, some from almost everywhere. It's kind of they try to introduce a new species using drug, and sometimes became problem, especially drugs. But new species, so in Taiwan the agricultural system is have many people. They can produce about 70 types, 70 species of fish. That's really large. You consider the size of the country. And the graduate disentanglement between industry and research institute. So nowadays, if you ask anyone in the industry, they will say they have no relationship. And you go to the research institute, they try to kind of make they still have some relationship, but kind of not as strong as the 1960 kind of government introduced technology, not anymore. So they have their own local local structure. The research institute, they often criticize for they have become another research institute, like college also. Their promotion is depending on the paper they publish, not the also. So that's my short story, and I hope it's kind of related to the issue is the Cold War and how these things become change or evolve by the local production structure, and eventually change the whole landscape and many other outcomes. So thanks for your patience.
Thank you very much. I learned so much about the agricultural structure and also the practice of shrimp farming in Taiwan. And the shrimp production having that kind of like certain stages following the changes of shrimp was like such an interesting story, and definitely shows the type relationship between human and non-human. And finally, we have Professor Chen Jianmin from National Zhongxing University, and his talk today is on food culture and materiality, connecting the stories of red coral necklace and soy sauce.
Thanks everyone for still being here. And after two insightful presentations given by Professor Hyun and Professor Cheng, now it is my turn to offer some recreation and food. By recreation and food, I mean red coral necklace and soy sauce, the two objects drawn from my previous research.
Oh,
to the next.
Sorry.
I should do it myself. So, the two objects are not relevant to each other, but it seems to me that they share something in common. They are both shaped by Cold War. And especially the next, the one on the right, the soy sauce. I think it's quite familiar with us. To us, it's quite familiar, especially in East Asia, right? There are two cases I would like to use today to better make sense of Cold War and its life. Before we move to my introduction of the two objects, I would like to talk a little bit about my take on Cold War briefly. I think as many scholars argue, Cold War remains existed in our daily life, or we may say Cold War still exists in our brain, our body, and our mind, and it's never gone too far. In particularly for people like me, who were born in the second half of the 1970s, Cold War is the essential part of life memories. Some part is vivid and yet some remains ambiguous. That is, on one hand, we live in Cold War eras, living with various propagandas and receiving KMT's, Kuomintan's patriotic education in our childhood. On the other hand, we also encounter numerous conflicting moments to witness Taiwan in a transforming process. I would not claim Cold War quite nature to us, but it indeed constitutes part of us. My generation in particular, generation to generation, life of Cold War and its memory could mean quite different, and many of us have part of it within us. Therefore, there is something I'd like to mention in advance. Unlike people survived from the World War II or people of baby boomer, we have been told a lot and heard a lot about life before and after the war was like. In so doing, we had been installed lots of second-hand experience. It's unique and it may go further to shape, if not to determine, how we sense Cold War. Therefore, it is thus meaningful for us not to ignore its complexity. Okay, and then let's move to the next. Thank you. Let's take a quick look at the photo I put on my slide. These 4 huge photos have been exhibited in Taiwan's shopping station to welcome the since Japanese tourists visiting Taiwan in the 1990s. They have different versions and many being interpreted slightly different. Many of you may have found the red jewel necklace are quite eye-catching and might be interested in why the 4 were put together. You may also wonder why that the photo of Queen Elizabeth presents and how this may work. She seems simply not fit in any already known historical narrative of Taiwan to the rest. And you are correct. In my field work as a licensed tour guide, I was told to ignore the picture of Queen. Otherwise, you won't be able to handle the story. Okay, so let's go back to the red coral. Yeah, after this morning's session, I feel regret I should get more prepared to talk about non-human actor, especially the coral boat or the fishing way, how they acquire. Basically, in Taiwan, they use hammer, like underwater to kind of crush the red coral, and so they won't get like huge red coral tree. So it get like priceless. So, but I will do that for my. I will bring the issue back, and that's my second home, kind of like second homework for later. Okay, so just more. Okay, although I think it could contribute to the field of. Let's go back to the red coral in today's presentation, or I think it could contribute to the field of environmental history. I wouldn't touch upon the topic of coral picking or coral boat in East Asia. There's more research need to be done for now. This object in Taiwan tells a story of the coral jewel that connects China's past, present, and the future to Taiwan. This object has been connected to 𝗘:𝘀𝗁, Chinese 曹珠or 东珠, worn by the Chinese emperor and the royal family members. Court beads are introduced by the Tibetan Buddhist monk and have become the symbol of the Qing emperors. The shopping station and the Taiwanese tour guide clearly sees the difference between court beads and the red coral. However, they choose to take advantage of court beads to claim red coral necklace similarity and its importance as Taiwan's tribute to the Qing central government. In such a narrative, they have created connection between contemporary Taiwan and China's remote past for the PRC tourists, again to reclaim Taiwan's Chineseness narrated by this object, this tourism souvenir. Moreover, a half-fabricated and half-true story has been told around the nationalist and the Taiwan in the Cold War period. The life story of Maiden Chiang Kai-shek, 𝗟𝘀𝘁𝗍 generates more attention from tourists. The anecdote of China's First Lady concerns not only her actions in the anti-Japanese war, but largely her charismatic personality and the tales of her personal life. The tourists are wondering how her life spent in Taiwan is like. Madam Chiang Kai-shek is extremely popular, partially because of the constructed historical familiarity associated with Kuomintang, which interested the tourists, and partially because of their powerful desire to see how the Chiang family has made Taiwan differ from Chinese mainland. Interest in the life story of Chiang family reached its peak with the emergence of nationalist fever, 民国热, the Chinese term, accompanying Chinese attempt to revise modern history. In this history and in the mass media, Jiang Song is portrayed as living a legendary life of mystery and wealth, leading to a widespread interest in the secrets of the Jiang family. The example of Jiang Song demonstrates how the exactness that attracts Chinese tourists originate in their historical understanding of Taiwan, in which Chiang Kai-shek's family holds a crucial position. There's nothing new to everyone here, but I'd like to let all of you to two different historical narratives of Jiang Song and of the Jewel, which are designed to pander to the Japanese tourist and the PRC tourist. The two different historical narratives come together in Cold War Taiwan. To the Japanese tourists, they have been attracted by Jiang Song, for they no longer feel uncomfortable to return to Japan's World War II memory. In post-war eras, they have chosen the US camp and then neutralized their memory of Japan's colonization. They came to Taiwan to search for Japan's remote and recent past. Instead of Chiang Kai-shek and his follower, the soft impression brought by Jiang Song helped not only to encourage their consumption, but their tourism practice in Cold War Taiwan and later on. Interestingly, both the Japanese and the PRC tourists, the Cold War experience from the different camp has led them to interact and to participate in person into contemporary history and somehow become the key to stimulate their desire to purchase such jewel. So we're going to move to the next. Okay. So now we're moving to the second object. I'd like to talk here. Taiwan's soy sauce. I don't know how many of you have noticed that Taiwan has two different kinds of soy sauce. The first one is Yiyou, it's black bean soy sauce. And the other one is soybean soy sauce, 豆瓣酱油 or 酱油, or simply soy sauce. It's confusing. I mean, to Taiwanese, many of us think we are testing 印油, but according to my statistics or my survey, more than 80% market share is secured by the gigantic food company, and they are brewing soybean soy sauce. So that's somehow like there's some difference kind of existing right now. This is an intriguing case because the decades over Taiwan soy sauce have brought Taiwan, Japan, China, as well as the US together in Taiwan, as they have played different roles to change Taiwan's dining table subtly. The soy sauce production and its consumption has been strongly associated with the Japanese brewing equipment and the US American raw material, namely wheat and soybeans. In the following, I will try to delineate how the Taiwanese flavor has been transformed from black bean soy sauce to soybean soy sauce. Sorry for it. And in this transformation, the modern brewing technology provided by the Japanese and the raw materials sold and promoted by American Soybean Association, 美国黄豆协会, have helped this changing flavor of the Taiwanese. What has not been fully discussed is the Cold War regime and what was brought to our daily life in the Cold War period. The two questions should be asked. When did the Taiwanese change their preference, and the reason why the Taiwanese had to change at the time? Even in the early 1980s, we still see the local black bean soy sauce brewer ceased. the major market share, only 30% of soybean soy sauce produced by the food industry offered to the market. The rapid urbanization and the consumer's strong desire, of course, to use the safer and clean products led this transformation. Nowadays, a clear line between black bean soy sauce 印油 and soybean soy sauce 动脉酱油、大豆酱油 has been drawn through both soy sauce product promotion and popular writing on Taiwan's soy sauce. 印油 is made of black beans and exposed to sun for at least 6 months. 大豆酱油 or soy sauce is usually made of soybean and wheat, and it requires 3 to 90 days of fermentation. That depends on different production procedures. So, please go back. Yeah. So on the right is a traditional 印油 brewing. They put the black beans in urns and put salt, so without adding any waters. The next is the Japanese imported equipment to brew wheat soybean soy sauce. So that's the difference. So we can see that one is being regarded as the traditional one, and the other is the modern one. So for the one on the next, so you can see that the U.S. soybean, the American Soybean Association tried to help hide in the behind, try to promote its soybean, its overseas soybean export. So that's how the system works. So because each soy sauce has its own primary raw material and the manufacturing process, the 印油 and the 酱油 brewer have been divided into 2 groups by both production method and flavor. 印油 brewers emphasize their conventional brewing procedures, and the 酱油 brewer tend to regard the modern production equipment installed in their factory site as a strong proof of the stable quality. Based on their different production methods, one may perceive an implied distinction, with the former as a traditional and the latter as a modern. The binary suggests a distinction that has been emphasized by the 2 different producers. The traditional 印油 brewer has restored Taiwanese brewing wisdoms. The modern 酱油 brewing relies heavily on the rest of a latest brewing machine. To further explain this distinction, I will summarize briefly the background history of soy sauce in Taiwan. Today, it is not difficult to figure out that the fear of chemically processed soy sauce reminds Taiwanese of food safety issue and raised major concerns over brewing technology. Fear of chemical soy sauce and food safety shocked Taiwanese consumer and made them to turn into 印油 products that are free of chemical brewing process. When brewing technology is mentioned in such context, it refers to the traditional and the modern brewing procedures utilized by the types of brewers and the images associated with 印油 and 酱油. Due to Taiwan's colonial history, 2 different kinds of soy sauce appears on Taiwan's dining table. Soybean soy sauce was introduced to Taiwan during Japan's colonial administration, simply because the Japanese colonial officer and other Japanese immigrants couldn't bear the flavor of 印油 that was introduced by the Han immigrant from the southern China from late Qing period. Due to Japanese regulation of brewing soy sauce during World War II, the 2 groups of soy sauce brewers finally had opportunity to meet one another and learn different brewing technology. Quite a few continue to brew both kinds of soy sauce in the post-war period. However, after several decades, the 2 sauces have today become symbolic representation of the traditional and the modern. It is noteworthy that brewing technology, or at least its appearance, has become the standard utilized to distinguish the modern from the traditional. In other words, brewing technology not merely defines Taiwan's 2 soy sauce products, but also draw a clear boundary line between the traditional and the modern by emphasizing the brewing method. Meanwhile, black bean soy sauce has been given authenticity and thus closely tied with Taiwan's distinctive tradition through the rediscovering Taiwan process, where Taiwanese distinguish themselves from the inherent Chinese foodways alongside the rise of Taiwan nationalism. Okay, so please the next slide. Okay, the 1970 special issue, as you can see that the 黄豆与制油10周年特刊酱油制造专辑 is published by American Soybean Association, 美国黄豆协会, has recorded the Japanese expert 广濑家夫 𝗘𝘀𝘁 Yoshi's talk. The talk was given on December 5th, 1973, to the Taiwan's major soy sauce brewers, and Mr. 𝗘𝘀𝘁 claimed the emerging necessity to introduce the modern brewing method. His talk firstly began to press the superior and stable supply of American soybeans, as well as the American wheat that is beneficial to soy sauce brewing industry. Also, according to Japan's mass production experience, environmental sanitation and automatic production is crucial to Taiwan's major food factory in the near future. 𝗘𝘀𝘁 continued, applying new technology will increase the annual yield of soybean sauce yield, and it's capable to satisfy the increasing demand of the Taiwanese. So his talk reads, the 20% lipid content of soybean has nothing to do with the fermentation, and we should not use the whole bean for production. So in Taiwan, the standard process is that you use that for salad oil, 𝗟𝘀, and then use the rest of it to brew soy sauce. So to the Taiwanese government, it's actually an economical way to produce soybean soy sauce in a sense. The most economic ways to take advantage of skin-peeled and deflated soybean, because the texture of beans not suitable for fermentation. Black beans used in production should be avoided. Plus, the fragrance of black bean soy sauce is not as good as soybean soy sauce. I don't know if any of you will agree with this, but for many Taiwanese, it's not acceptable. So its production is fine if we can keep it as a local flavor, according to Mr. 𝗘𝘀𝘁. One may clearly understand Mr. 𝗘𝘀𝘁's stance toward Inyo from his talk. Just the next slide, please. Okay, so I just simply try to show you like lecture introduce different kinds of latest model of brewing machine recently used in Japan in 1980s. So kind of like half of the special issue is like this. Then it followed modern soy sauce factory are equipped with brewing machine of latest model and of great efficiency, which middle and small factory could never imagine. Based on the record, we may draw a brief picture of how the US dominant soybean export has been gradually changed our dining table in Cold War period simply by supporting major food industry to take over the market share of black bean soy sauce. To conclude, not only the Japanese brewing technology as well as its modern equipment help to renew Taiwan's soy sauce brewing, but the US food regime and the US 408 civil law that allows Taiwan could use its domestic dollar to purchase US agricultural products. All of this play an essential role in this change. Okay, so I will move to my conclusion, very short conclusion. In this presentation, I used two objects, red coral necklace and the soy sauce in Taiwan, to illustrate how Cold War along with other factors have changed the way the tourists think about Taiwan and the Taiwanese taste it. From both cases, one may see different actors come into play, and they brought significant change. Okay, I think I will end here. And if you have a question and want to know more details, then we can talk about later. Thank you for your attention.
Okay, so I will invite all three speakers from the afternoon session to come front, and we can start our Q&A time. So, thank you for giving us such a great presentation. While the floor prepares their questions, I will use my privilege as moderator and ask my first question to all three of the speakers today. So my question is actually about scales and localities of each story. In terms of human, like for example, Dr. Hyun discusses this like trans-Asian network within the US superpower. Dr. Zhang talks about Taiwan's researcher trained in Japan and US and also shrimp farmers. And also Dr. Zhang talks about the Japanese and PRC tourists and also Taiwan's like soybean consumers and also government. But if we think about non-humans, it's not bounded by like all this localities of humans we discussed about like the nation, like where they learn, where they reside. But when we think about non-humans, it's like skies and sometimes in laboratory. Shrimp, it's some ocean and many times in ocean farms, like seaside farms. Carol in underwater and different kinds of beans in their fermentation containers. So it's grand transnational stories, but at the same time, it becomes as small as a particular shrimp tasting sense of these individuals. So I would like to know more about what is your approach in managing like this macro and also micro relationships and discussing very particularly situated life and materials, but within this larger Cold War. So it's general like methodological questions, I guess. Thank you.
Thank you for the great question, and it's really, I think that it's not easy to answer, but I think that I have to just comments that my work is originally from the new historiography of science diplomacy rather than the material history that we are discussing today. So there should be some limitations that I can answer to your questions. But in terms of some skills, how can I say, the maps, the project that I'm looking at right now, in fact, has been quite frequently studied by several scholars, particularly by some anthropologists who are interested in birds in Taiwan, in Hong Kong, and also some historians of ornithology based in America. But they mostly focused on the McClure and his name and his some official reports. And I thought that it's an international project, it's a trans-Asian project, but we need to look at some detail, what's happened in some local context. And so I also had to use some kind of the national boundaries like South Korea and Japan, and I feel really bad. I wanted to be just escaped from that kind of confinement, but but at the same time, I think that by looking at the interaction, much more local interaction between Japanese and South Korean ornithologists, I think that I can just decentralize the previous established scholarship on the maps as a Cold War, US-led Cold War science project. So I don't know if it can answer your question. Very difficult question. Comprehensive.
Originally, I'm an economy sociologist, so I originally see that's a local phenomenon. That's the local network, local production, because everybody, most people in Taiwan, when he sold off the aquaculture, they often see that's a very local thing. And so that's my original assumption. So that's kind of a later discovery. And of course, one part is to try to fit in the discussion today is that how its origin. is that it has some, they really don't have any clear methodology. But I realized that that's not a movement only occurring in Taiwan, because I think there are many parts I didn't deal with. But like at that time, for example, there are still many U.S.-sponsored research institutes, like in Philippines and many places. And one thing important for Taiwan in both, I do believe, not only in the colonial context, but in the Cold War context, that it often seen as a place where you can develop something to more toward the south. So why they have this in Donggang? Actually, it is a quite prosperous fish town, but not the place where you can think of try to put the newest research there. And I guess the reason is that because that's a southern part of Taiwan. So they believe they kind of can expand those this skill to this technology to more southern. So actually at the same time, U.S. also sponsor a research institute for the fishery in the Philippines. They kind of competition. But actually I'm not expert on that. Just what I find, I guess that will be maybe future discussion. That's one part of the how the technology change. So if you ask me the Cold War or the colonial period, I think in Taiwan, especially the role is the south. So people, and we know that when we talk development, it's always the north-south. If you look at the development project in the Cold War, it's also similar how to give the southern people more protein, and that's why they have such investment. Why they research into actually many of them in the southern Taiwan, which was not far from the center of academic at that time. Like also another example I didn't really study, but I know the history is the hog farm, the pig industry, and they also put in southern Taiwan. So maybe they have this kind of project, but how this project goes, that's I think will be interesting to see how those. Taiwan was kind of in between the south and north. In fact, it's easy. Difficult to say Taiwan is Northeast Asia and so Southeast Asia, and I think that means something in the Cold War context or earlier. The other thing is also kind of extension. I also didn't study, but kind of recently found is that the species, the way species kind of, because in the past, in the literature like anthropology of aquaculture, especially focused on Norway, and we often see species as very stable one. I think in STS, everybody read the article about the scallop in the France. So you think about it's kind of relatively stable single species, but not included in this presentation, but actually the species has changed almost every 5 years in Taiwan. So the experiment they found they kind of much more not a stable. But species, how do they try to use their network or other things to, especially from the tropical area, and also then from an expert of the fishery science, and he say that there's very different ecology between the tropical or the northern area, how to fish the species and the relationship. So I think maybe also that's another, I think maybe in the future we can look at that, and especially in the Cold War context, how they deal with this kind of the weather, or even we often think that's a nature, so we don't look at that. But I think that's kind of important in terms of how they build their project, how do they understand the geographical difference. So that's some of my quick thoughts.
Oh, this is definitely a difficult question to me. I will pay a lot for try to find a solution. But to me, I mean, in my study of soy sauce, I think it's very regional, national, societal, individual, personal, and when we talk about flavors, it's sensational. So it's human body. So I try to take care of like each aspect, but it seems to be very difficult. But when we go into details, people say that's your own experience. Then it's kind of difficult to argue in a very organized way. That's how I feel. But so I don't have any solution. Just share my how do I say, my difficulty to dealing with these issues. Yeah.
Thank you so much. I think like Anthropocene itself is very, we're talking in a global like art sense, but like the cases we bring in are very local and small. So I thought it would bring some kind of like discussion on like how to approach this locality and make it into the stories about Anthropocene. Thank you very much. I'll take questions from the floor. Yes.
So I have to appear in the script. So thank you very much. It's all very, good session. So I'm really grateful for being here. So actually, I always think about what's the connection between the morning section and this session. And one of the things I say, like in this morning, we say a lot of bad things, like disasters, events, pollutions, a lot of things, which shows like the downside of why we need Anthropocene studies. But in this session, we're doing the generative side of this, because people make profit, make business, make industry from it. So let me think about the two sides of Cold War science. That one, on the one hand, is very ideological, say like we're driven by some old colonial legacies among others. But on the other hand, it's a sort of capitalist agenda. So like we make money, it's a developmental agenda, we want to make profit, we make development of it. So I have a general question maybe for three of you say, especially for Jing and Li-Hsuan, is that it seems to me like what you just said about your stories made me think about the old term, often used the South, global South means extravagantism. That means say like removal from the natural resource and the remaining processing, you get money from it. Basically, you just exploit the natural resource like forests or other things. And it seems to me say like your stories just make me think about that. For example, like the Li-Hsuan story, I would wonder, say like before the fish pond, what it used to be? There used to be a rice paddy or other things. So apparently they get replaced by something more probable. And also related to genuine stories that you compare two kinds of things. Like one thing is very essential technology because soy sauce is like a lot of people, Chinese people need it. It's very essential everyday technology. But the one of Red Carroll is very, ideological, right? You got a lot of kings and queens. This is filled in some of the imaginaries about like. So apparently there are different kind of product, but they aim on the same thing. That is a sort of development. So it seems to be thinking about like what did we say whether like extravagantism or say like kind of developmental agenda is still valid if you take care of Anthropocene studies, and also back to the Jaehwan story about the like bird watching. I'm thinking about because Li-Hsuan already said like some of natural resources actually is moving, just like mullet, the wu-yu, wu-yu actually fishing it from here to there, and actually when they pass by the territory, people try to catch it, right? It's a kind of moving resource. That is also the one in the herbal study. So I'm curious about like whether if we go back to the Cold War context, whether the kind of developmental agenda or say like what the developmental strategy is still valid. Even we would take the scope, the new scope of Anthropocene studies. Thank you.
So yeah, thank you for the great question. And just in relation to the Anthropocene and historically, I think that my case indicates a kind of the development of the role of science as monitoring of the Anthropocene and bird watching. The transnational bird watching project flourished during that time with the development of the global environmentalism. And in fact, many of ornithologists who participated in the MAPS project later became the national conservationists and global environmentalists, and they developed some worldwide monitoring system. And I think that part of some activities carried out by Korean ornithologists and international ornithologists, the DMZ also quite originated from this project in some sense. So historically, this project, the Coldor project, is related to the production of the global nature, and bird was a part of it, and also the production of the some kind of the environmental science for Anthropocene. And also, it's a bit related to or not, but in the 60s and 70s, I think that historians have to, particularly who are interested in the Anthropocene or Anthropocene studies, have to pay more attention because there were, maybe some of you already know that there was already some kind of an interdisciplinary effort that we are doing with the Anthropocene studies at the time, and it's called the human ecology. So in the 60s and 70s, particularly after 1972, the Stockholm event, some social scientists and ecologists began to think that they can they have to collaborate to solve the issues of the pollution and some global environmental crisis. And it was the first attempt to just to tackle the global issue by some interdisciplinary collaboration, but it went failure. And I think that more historians of science and as scholars have to look at that history to understand or to develop the better future for our Anthropocene studies. Thank you.
First, yeah, I think if you look at environment, I didn't emphasize this part, but there's not a very good story because some of you may know, the coastal village actually had a very severe problem of sinking, the land kind of sinking, and if you visit there, it's very kind of, I would not say funny, but kind of because the sea is actually much higher than the land. So that's a big price because everybody can kind of extract the underground water. So actually, I think not only like you look at the sea, but also they have really, really big influence. And actually, nobody knows how to solve this problem. And nobody nowadays knows even you cannot stop the aquaculture because the whole energy is relying on that. The whole region. And if anyone tries to do that, definitely lose the election, and that's the story. So everyone try to regulate this thing, and they must do the very, very careful. Otherwise, they soon be thrown out from the local government. And so that's another story. Another part is not a very good story is that because in the system, people kind of use very intense. They have very intensive, and it's an environment which kind of generate a lot of disease. Officially, and that's also become always unstoppable. And if you ask them, some of them say, okay, that's the environment because we put too many, but they still do that. And sometimes by strong medicine, sometimes they just if they cannot come. Actually, the shrimp industry after its peak, it can disappear because due to the virus, the eruption of virus. But because they very soon find new species to put in your system. So, and not by the government or anything, but by the So I think there are indeed some and not a very huge environmental cost, and I do believe it's not foreseen by, even by, if you ask him, he said he actually didn't think that will become that way. And the disease is kind of the problem of the global aquaculture sector. So that's the aquatic sector. So that's the problem. So actually, they did have. If you look at environment, I think there's a cost there. But also, I think the core is multi-dimensional. So I think in this story, of course, one part of the story is that we have a core, and probably is how to combine is the different combination of Japanese and American. I think both in all of our story we have this element. But the other element I think in Korea, Taiwan, and it's very important is the land reform. And now today more discussion of that. But land reform has become a small farmer system and a lot of, and of course we know the original intention is trying to prevent the rise of Communist Party. So not only in the land reform, but in every kind of this system, they kind of a lot of way to quite restrain, become cooperation or try to protect the small farmers in some way. They all find the same system. So it's kind of a complicated combination of the element of Cold War. That's what I actually say. So I don't think that's a one single story. We can see those elements that try to prevent communist parties. I think it's a central intention of Cold War, and also the idea of development. We now have more criticism, but maybe probably 1960, 50, I don't know. But how many people have that kind of, I don't know, I'm not a historian, but there's development and there's political element and also some regional variance, because we know Japan's role in the East Asian Cold War system, but probably not in many other places. And of course, that's colonial legacy. So I would say, like, you go back to this kind of assemblage. I'm not expert of that too, but kind of I think how different elements actually come together at such a place at a time produce an outcome. So that's my take of this.
Yeah, good questions, and I'd like to divide it into two parts. One is the in my the case of soy sauce. Both I'm talking about is from soy sauce, but yeah, it's Taiwan soy sauce. They use like local grains, like local grown black beans, and emphasize it's like non-chemical or like local farmer grown it. And they even have something like tangerine soy sauce using, like, how do I say, overly overgrown tangerines to make soy sauce. The flavor is close to 𝗟𝘀𝗁𝗟𝗃, Japanese. So try to have different role to, yeah, it's difficult to blend together. But then let's move to the second case. I'd like to say, 𝗘𝘀𝘁, the world's biggest soy sauce manufacturer, they can promote their new type of shoyu. It's called the Ikiru shoyu, living soy sauce. The gene still like keep growing, help grow the soy sauce. So in the past, we don't really talk about, we want our shoyu to be not being polluted. So we try to kill every microbes, every genes before they sold to the public, sold to the consumers. But right now, they still, they kind of change of their mind. They are thinking of a good environment to keep the soy sauce keep fermenting and in a good flavor without adding too much preservatives. So that's interesting case I'm looking at. So I think in both cases we see that how they try to bring the new idea to brew soy sauce. So that's basically what I want to say.
Thank you. Any other questions from the floor? Yes.
Thank you very much. Very interesting and some very diverse topics, and then you nicely put the stories together under the Cold War issues. And so I've been thinking about what does Cold War mean in this context, or you just put the Cold War to have something in common, or whether the Cold War plays a really big role in your narrative. You know, if Cold War is just time period after 1945, you may describe it in a different way. Other than that, I think there may be two ways to tackle. One is the Cold War is not one-sided; it's two-sided, right? United States and Soviet, right? And communism and capitalism, and South Korea, North Korea. And then there is always opposing values and ideologies and things. Whenever you do something and then you have something alternative, and then how does that affect you or not? And then that's a big issues to consider. And that's one way of engaging Cold War issues in the story. And the other is actually it's in history there is a big debates over periodization and continuity and discontinuity. And if you put the Cold War up front, then the basic assumption is that there is a discontinuity, right? Then you have to characterize and articulate what is the discontinuity, and then what is the benefits of emphasizing that discontinuity. Otherwise, it gets confused. And then I confused for some reasons, and one is, for example, soy sauce. And then it's Korea and then Japan and Taiwan has a sort of a traditional way of making soy sauce, and then during the Cold War period, and then there is other technologies available, and then there's competitions. But we may be able to emphasize sort of a traditional side, right? And then I'm thinking of probably that Victoria Lee's book on the microbiology, and then the long tradition of the Japanese living with the microorganism, and then soy sauce, and then sake, and other big industry, and then how they sort of sustain sort of a research tradition into the Cold War. And then it's different stories, but there is an emphasis on continuity. And then I see something like that in your story, that how it goes into that. And ornithology, actually, Jaehwan emphasizes some kind of new things, but the Japanese colonial government also emphasized the study of birds. And if you go to the Korea's National Science Museum in Daejeon, and there is a big collection of birds, which was collected during the Japanese colonial period. And then they were interested in birds for some reasons. And then there is a number of accounts. And so it's not just all of a sudden the U.S. Sort of studying that kind of projects, and then well, this is environmental and all interesting new phenomenon. But there is some something going on. I don't know about the shrimp industry and other things, but there may be something going on in continuity. But I might be wrong, and then if you want to emphasize the Cold War aspects, and then there may be a way of saying something.
So thank you, Professor 𝗶𝗶, for the great question. And just for my case, it have to say Cold War if we look at the collaboration team, because all collaborators were just under the bamboo curtain, and the U.S. military presence in Asia was really important. So all the participant countries of the maps impact where the U.S. military base was located. It included the Taiwan and Japan and South Korea, as well as Malaysia. So 4 countries were strongly influenced by U.S. military presence on the one hand, and the U.S. technical aid on the other hand. And also, I have to say that the collaboration between the Japanese and South Korean ornithologists were only enabled within the umbrella of this U.S. military lead international project, particularly before 1965. So it's quite different from the Taiwanese context because due to the really strong anti-Japanese sentiment before 1965, when Japan and South Korea made the diplomatic normalization, the scientists had a quite difficulty in the interaction, between each other. With the Japanese scientists officially, because it could be considered kind of the pro-Japanese collaborating motive, and it's a really quite politically risky in the anti-Japanese sentiment strong on the Korean context, particularly before 1965. So in fact, that is one of the difficulties that Korean historians are looking at the interaction between the Japanese and Korean scholars after the World War II, before the 1965, because the Korean scholars try to hide what they did with the Japanese scholars. So if you wanted to the materials, then you have to look at the Japanese materials or the American materials. Then you can find that kind of the informal collaboration between the Japanese and Korean scholars. And related to the continuity of the colonial stories. Yes, first of all, I have to say that recently, including myself and more Asian scholars try to decentralize the typical idea of a Cold War as a discontinuity. And they just, they wanted to, including myself, wanted to decentralize the typical idea of the US-centered technical aid between United States scientists or engineers and Korean or Taiwanese or other Japanese or other the respective people. And the solution was to pay more attention to the inter-Asian exchange. So I used intentionally the word Trans-Asia, and that is a way to just emphasize, or how can I say, just I try not to lose or ignore the role of the US military or the US technical aid in the development of science and technology in South Korea, in the South Korean context. But at the same time, I wanted to say that the Cold War enabled more collaborations within the Cold War ally countries. Even though, but at the same time, like Japan, some Cold War ally countries had some kind of the colonial past, and that past did not just go away after World War II because the human networks and materials and many things still remain. So we try to show more complicated nature of the Cold War instead of just defining it as discontinuity. And in terms of the ornithological work during the colonial period, so that's also really interesting that maybe you saw a lot of birds specimens in Daejeon National Science Museum in Daejeon and many areas, and many of them are collected by colonial collaborators of Yamashina and Kuruda. And one of the bird scientists was Mori Damejo. In fact, he was a zoologist, so he collected all the animals, including birds. So he was like a decade-long collaborator of Yamashina. So quite a lot of specimens were studied together with Yamashina. So in most cases, he collected some specimens or bought some specimens in some market, Korean market, during the holiday period. And he sent a specimen to Yamashina Institute. Then Yamashina just checked the detail and listed and wrote some paper together. And same thing later happened with Hong-gu-won. He was the father of Byung-won, the today's the character. He also just began to be included with that kind of some imperial network made by the Yamashina and Kuruda from the 1930s. And so, and furthermore, maybe I have to add that even though during the colonial period, and as Annika Colors said, there are sort of the Trans-Asian ornithological project, but the nature is quite different. because in the 20s and 30s, they collected birds for some natural history purposes, just for the systematics, and they didn't have some conservation agenda, and even they didn't have any idea that they had the idea that migratory birds could deliver some actual parasites, but that kind of things only were enabled to more sophisticatedly investigated after 1960s, and by the presence of the U.S. military laboratories and their some technical aid. Yeah, so I don't know. I answered right on the. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks for your comment. I would definitely Victoria Lee's book.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, and I think it's
published quite recently.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I will definitely read it after this. Cold War and Cold War ideology. I'd like to cite Yoshimi Shinya, the Japanese media scholar. He and his colleagues kind of like posed a question, say, has the Cold War ended? So this is kind of like a influential question to many scholars in cultural studies. And I think I was kind of think of in that way, like how Cold War ideology continues and be absorbed in our body or in our thoughts, and how we react to it. So how we interact with this object. So I think soy sauce is the good example for because we use it daily, but we didn't pay attention how it changed. Like most of the Taiwanese, they are not aware what kind of soy sauce the vendors or the restaurant used for them now. And they claim that they know because of this specific fragrance, but in the reality they don't, they just eat. So that's something I will use it as a kind of a metaphor to say like a Cold War exists, and kind of like its influence continues to us only if we pay enough attention. Otherwise, like just like the U.S. dominance in or so-called U.S. imperialism like functions behind. So if we don't pay enough attention, we wouldn't kind of like catch it. So that's my. I don't know if I answered what you're trying to ask, but yeah, that's my understanding.
Yeah, so it's a difficult question, and like you mentioned, I also read from some Japanese historians. They will say the post-war, because some of them will say post-war right in about 3 decades, and that's kind of certain region, and some will say that after 90 they go post-war, and probably the first post-war means Cold War in a sense. Yeah, I think there's many. I think there's several layers. Some layer, like especially politically, try to replace the left wing, and I think that's very like especially in the early 1950s, that's an important part, and also. So my view of Cold War is not much more like a context. I would see it's maybe an element, not necessarily internally coherent, but they are there, and there are some different historical or social context. We have different kind of assembling them or kind of combining them. So that's what my take on Cold War. And of course, there are some very important political implications that is trying to reject communism. So the land reform and the other white terror, there are other things is there, and also like under this large kind goal or like the whole idea of development actually, initially I believe is trying to also prevent the communists, right? So the USA, the agency is called like common security. I remember is that kind of they put all the development project as to look at a security issue. So there is a lot. So. So my question will be, okay, so what thing is that Cold War trying to replace, the structure trying to replace? And we know the lack of willpower, or what's others? I'm just curious because I don't really know. I think if we not only look at what Cold War is, but what the Cold War system excludes, then maybe very fruitful to look at what's the Cold War context. And also because I'm not a historian, from my knowledge, the idea of Cold War or USA in Taiwan is a very interesting discussion because during a certain period, our historical education history, we know colonial context, we also don't have Cold War context. Everything is done by the great government. That's the textbook I read. So many people the attitude is much more like, oh, this is built by Japanese. Oh, that's funded by the American. There's many people will feel kind of enlightened to find that, not a kind of anti-colonial, anti-Cold War like some people will have this kind of attitude, probably because our education system try to kind of say everything from that, because like many USA projects, they will say that's led by the great government, great leader, and some historians say no, that's funded and built by Americans. So that's a very subtle context in how people look at this thing. And I don't have any formal investigation, but my guess is many people will nowadays in Taiwan will see those things not very negative or even some like enlightened way. Let's see, okay, so maybe next stage we can have more reflection on why it's negative. But the positive memory, some of them are actually excluded by the formal education or things like it's not until recently that some of them begin to kind of emerge. For example, I just gave a maybe related example. Last Sunday, I'm in a symposium talking about the anthropology study in the Japanese colonial period. And this audience, he has, those Japanese scholars are so great. Because the reason he said that is that because in post-war, we are not encouraged to study anything about Taiwan. We know that those Japanese scholars, they have some like the imperial gaze. We have another theory, I fully agree with that. But that old man, he just told some things like that. Okay, we are not allowed to study Taiwan, but how these Japanese scholars pay so much attention to our home? That's so great. Yeah, even though I don't believe many Taiwanese will have that, that's because if you look at the historical consciousness, is that we have a certain period, everything about Taiwan is kind of excluded in our education. So I guess how people look at that will be, I think will be very different from Korea, which has this vivid memory of things kind of be replaced by the whole world. And I would not say Taiwan had the same, we have the white terrorist thing, but also another much more complex issue, especially contemporary nationalism or things like that. Yeah, so that's my, I don't know whether I answered the question, but that's my quick thought on this.
Maybe I just add a quick note about this new terminology related to just complicate the current some division of binary of colonial continuity and Cold War discontinuity. So usually the Japanese scholars they use the term trans-war history and to try to explain, try to escape from the idea of Shenzhen and Senko. And it's 1945 as a 0 point. They tried to think of connecting to several wars. So I mean the Pacific War, the Manchurian invasion, and the Second Sino-Japanese War, and Pacific War and Cold War are connected. So we have to understand that there are several wars, and the Cold War also have to be understood in that context. And maybe I think that it's quite useful to discuss our topic that we are talking about.
Okay, we have about 8 minutes, and I think we can have maybe one or two more questions from the floor.
May I add a...
Oh yeah, sure, of course. Yes, please.
Sorry, may I add a student level question? After these many cases that we have learned today, we already know that many actors, especially non-human actors, can easily crossing the any types of border or boundary, like crime or anything else. But I still get a little bit confused that to what extent can we, or more importantly, shouldn't we think or discuss the concept of Anthropocene in a concept like such like a Cold War, this kind of periodical or eventful context, or nation state, this kind of regional context. That's my question.
I think that it's not our job to go to the first sessions. I have something to say.
Actually, that is the question that I'm thinking quite heavily these days, because which is related to the Cold War, and before 2020 or earlier 2016, or the Western world celebrate the end of the Cold War, and some people, like Fukuyama says, it's the end of history. Even like 1989 or 1991, depending on which events you place more emphasis. It's end of history. It's a victory, and it's a different world. And I was actually always suspicious of that claim, because in Korea, the Korean Peninsula embodied the continuation of the Cold War. It has never ended. The DMZ is just there, right? And so maybe the Western world, the way they talk about Cold War is very different from the way the Koreans are talking about the Cold War. So I'm just actually today curious about how Taiwanese or other East Asian country scholars think about Cold War. And then in relation to Anthropocene, what we are witnessing is actually, some people say that it's Cold War deja vu, the Russian invasion of Ukraine, which is actually targeted to the Western world. And then the war is actually the old style war, and then during the Cold War, the real confrontation between the US and USSR was avoided, and then Korea and Vietnam was sort of a proxy wars. But now it's the Ukraine is a bit of proxy, but Russia is deep involved. So it's a real war. Now, going back to your question, and then how Anthropocene as a concept can make sense of this kind of realpolitik or real world political events. And I think we should be able to. to take that into considerations and then include in the narrative. And then, so I'm talking about very political side of the Anthropocene. Not just environmental or ecological crisis or hope, and some kind of apocalyptic situations and what we're going to do, but somehow the very root of the Anthropocene has something to do with the very root of the Cold War confrontations or the Russian invasion of the Ukraine. And one of the bases of the Russians' invasion is that they were able to accumulate a great amount of wealth from their natural resources, oil, gas, and others. And Ukraine is also very rich in certain rare materials, and also it's the land for wheat and others. So there is something that energy and then ecosystem, there is something that we can think about. And if Anthropocene scholars are able to penetrate the discourse of the political events, it's going to be, or economic situations, it's going to be great work. But still, I feel like it's still a lot to work in terms of theory and in the case studies. But I have conjectures, and probably that's your job.
Li-Hsuan first, right? Or say Jaehwan first.
Because I thought, if you ask how ordinary Taiwanese take over, I don't think they have many feeling about that. One of the reasons, my guess, I don't have any. And of course, in Taiwan there are some left-wing intellectuals, and they have very resentful towards, especially those who kind of the left-wing and pro-unification, and they believe, I think it's much more like what many Koreans believe is that kind of the Cold War kind of segregate the nation, so this kind of stuff. As far as I know, that's not the majority of Taiwanese people thinking. So, and I think theory, history is a little bit different. And in the in the Japanese colonization of Korea, after the end of the colonization, is kind of, even though you may like dislike the government, after all, they are all controlled by Koreans. But in Taiwan, that's a totally different story, because in post-war, Taiwanese was excluded again. I mean, the day before yesterday is February 28th. That's kind of event, kind of signal that thing that is you are. So people generally have very different, I think, from Koreans have a different view like toward Japanese, because like for example, in Korea, Korean people have very strong resentment toward Japan, but also they have a lot of connection and those kind of the cooperation or many things economically made, no matter like or not, kind of in a very complete way, but still going on. But in Taiwan, it's like, because like for example, the official language is Mandarin, but most Taiwanese didn't speak Mandarin at that time. And actually, most Taiwanese, they have more knowledge in Japanese than Mandarin. So that's kind of become the whole generation becomes speechless because they cannot even. So people look at people in that generation when they meet Japanese people, they have Nespagalia, they have not to speak like my grandparents, they have to speak Japanese with them. That's the very difficult history. So in the sense, again, the same thing is that there are some, if you feel, I think in Taiwan, how do you look at intellectual, how do you look at Cold War? It kind of depends on how do you look at the segregation across the strait. If you believe that shouldn't be like the case, then you have more strong negative toward the whole world. And if you think you are celebrate that, you think it's lucky, and then you may not really say good thing about Cold War, but you don't have such negative. So I think it's kind of depends on your political position and how do you think of the Taiwan's relationship with China. And the other thing is, and I do agree with the idea that we should look more, because many things, as I say, many times don't really realize that that kind of came from that period. One of my friends now study traffic, because, for example, we have a terrible traffic, and we have almost no public transport, very poor public transportation. And it's really bizarre, because you think we have the highest population density in the world. And why? Because some study, and many people don't know the fact is that during 1960 or 70, the U.S. expert told you the B-roll and the car, that's the modern way to go, and so that's eventually going to we have we not fool ourselves traffic hell, and because we so there are many like what Jaehwan said. A lot of like we everyday life actually came from that period, especially from the structure of the U.S. expert, and they try to suggest that's the better way of living, and then we somehow consciously or unconsciously said that. I think that's the thing we should reflect, and to see what exactly, and also to see the, as I say, or suggested, what be replaced at that time. What's the solution of people try to make? Select what's the choice people want to make at that time, and replaced by the Cold War. I think that will be very important. For example, like the agriculture, many even the scholarly government they agree with one thing, that we pay so much attention on productivity, and we didn't really look at the social structure at the village. And is that the legacy of Cold War? I haven't studied that, but I believe there's have some relationship with the U.S. idea, like how agriculture should go at that time. So that's my some response.
Okay, then I think you have
some short comments. As long as you have time. You can finish, I can do it.
Okay. So the time has up. It was such a wonderful discussion. Thank you all for joining us today. And I would also like to thank our staffs who made all this available. And thank you for the sponsors who made this available as well. Thank you for coming in today.